Hi, everybody, and thanks for joining our weekly podcast. I'm Robin Lewis, founder and CEO of the Robin Report, which, by the way, is much more than a daily report and certainly not a newsletter. It really is a knowledge platform, and from which we communicate thought leadership on various strategic topics through, the daily reports, but also these podcasts. And we do webinars and hopefully in the future, some live events. And along with our chief strategist, Shelley Kohan, who, by the way, is also a professor at FIT and Syracuse University, we welcome you to our conversation on the topic of consumer spending remains strong as headwinds build. So joining us today, and we're honored to have him, is our special guest, Andy Mantis, who's president of Commerce Signals. And Andy's someone who always adds value to our podcast. So Andy, it's great to see you again. And, to help us unravel what your data means in terms of a consumer spending, you just released Commerce Signals' new report on the impact of inflation on consumer spending. So before we jump into our discussion, can you take us through what Commerce Signals and what Commerce Signals does and what you do for that company?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Robin. Always good to see you, and Shelley, great to see you as well. So Commerce Signals is part of the TransUnion family, and at Commerce Signals, we help our customers get a clear understanding and picture of competitive trends, industry trends, and perhaps most importantly, overall consumer spend trends and the way their consumers and their competitors' customers are spending. We do this in a very data-driven approach. We see over 60% of the credit and debit card spend every day in the US.
Wow.
It's all anonymized data, but you take that data, turn it into insights and action. So as a result, our customers are able to make more precise and accurate strategic decisions, and also, importantly, take more effective marketing actions to drive better outcomes, which these days, when there's less and less money to invest, is very important.
Yep.
Wow, Andy. And there's also so many factors that kind of play into consumer spending and overall economic growth, household income, inflation, unemployment, and of course, the political environment. So really trying to project consumer spending can be difficult, but we do know consumerism is like 68% of our GDP. And just released today, this morning, GDP rose 1.1% for Q1. And although that was down from 2.6 for Q4 of last year, still shows growth, but albeit it confirms a slowing of consumer spending. So Andy, maybe you can provide some framework around consumer spending and how Commerce Signals is measuring this over time.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Well, also, I think we need a bit of a breakdown in terms of discretionary spending and non-discretionary spending. Consumers have really been hit hard in terms of housing, rentals, mortgages for new homes, and food and energy. So maybe you can break that down for us.
Sure. Yeah, I'll give a little high-level overview and then get into some of the macro findings. So, just to start, think about discretionary as, truly discretionary. It's often in the eye of the consumer, but things like travel, many retail purchases, entertainment, these are all discretionary to the consumer. But on the flip side, non-discretionary is made up of your basics, fuel. Many people have to drive to work, so fuel is really a non-discretionary spend. Grocery is non-discretionary, as are things like utilities and certain services. So, that is that basic core that when inflation drives up the number of dollars people have to spend on that non-discretionary bucket, they have to make more and more choices about how they spend the discretionary. And we'll dive into that a bit in a minute. But to the conversation, our last inflation report was last summer. And I mean, it just, in 6, 8 months, what a world of difference. Last July, inflation was 9%. Now, Shelley, you just referenced some of the numbers that came out. I think it's about 5% now. When we put out our report last month, it was 6%.
Yeah.
And, if you think back to last July, you had higher fuel prices, right? The war in the Ukraine had spiked, a lot of the fuel prices. You have higher cost of labor. Overall inflation was really high, and to add to that, grocery prices, I believe, were at historic highs. So at that time, what we saw was within your non-discretionary spend, people were trading off, like they were buying the same amount at a grocery store, but given higher prices, they were trading to cheaper items, let's say generic versus brand items. And we were seeing, last summer, it was one of a much better situation as far as being able to get out, not worry about COVID. We were seeing, year over year growth, but declining month by month consumer spend in those discretionary categories. So, you fast forward to this report, and much to the surprise of many, discretionary spend has held up really, really well. So although it did decline, we saw in the first 2 months of the year actually a little bit of a tick back up in discretionary spend. And in this conversation, we'll get into some of the details on the what and the why.
Yeah, I know we're going to get into some more details and spending on categories. Also, the direct impact on retail in terms of the categories. But Andy, let's start with one of your highlighted categories for 2023, and that is travel. Travel has been up, compared to last year and heading into 2023. So, can you speak to recreation and travel specifically?
Sure.
And this obviously flows right into how consumers will spend on retail and restaurants. And of course, we know consumers are very happy to get out after being locked down for almost 3 years. So it makes sense.
Absolutely, Rob. Look, it's clear there is pent-up demand. People want to get out. And as we go through the discussion, we will see that people are trading things like spending in-home for getting out and about, be it at travel, restaurants, recreation. So, yeah, I mean, it's really a spectacular growth year over year. We saw total travel dollars up 34%.
Wow.
And that's not just driven by prices. We see travel transactions up over 20%. So it's a combination.
Yeah.
There's some higher pricing, but people are just going out and traveling more. And then you look at some other categories like, we bucket a few together, like, rideshare, taxis, etc. We see that up like over 70% year over year. Actually,
Amazing. Yeah.
And then, diving in a little more specifically to airlines, I don't know about you guys, I'm getting out and doing both some business and personal travel. I grumble about the prices, but I'm going out and traveling more. And we do see airline spend up 50% year over year. Although, within airlines, everyone's grown, but it's not equal. You've got American and Delta, they're doing great. Southwest is kind of coming back from some of those issues they had, but JetBlue has lost some share and they have not, kept pace with the others.
That's so interesting. So when I read the analysis, it did not actually surprise me that JetBlue was lagging. in terms of the others. I mean, they started this whole new pricing scheme, which quite frankly is actually not very transparent for a novice traveler.
Yeah.
And they actually seem to be much higher priced than the competitors. And the other thing they've done is they're rolling out their new loyalty program, which, by the way, is not super transparent. And here's a tip for JetBlue: if it takes a company over a year to explain and roll out a new loyalty program, it's probably too complicated. So, oh yeah, and they merged with American Airlines. Not sure that helps with the JetBlue brand. Anyway, sorry to go off on a tangent here, but I'm definitely booking more travel this year for sure.
Yeah, me too. But Shelley, those are good points you made. And on JetBlue, um, but I usually fly Delta if I can, and they do a pretty good job. But I should probably have said they are the least worse. Because don't get me started about air travel today in general. I'm old enough to remember when even economy class was better than first class is today. Anyway, the inflation impact report is really good, Andy, and I have to give your team great credit, and it has a great many details about travel. But let's move on to some of the other categories, and not to steal your thunder, but the two statistics that stood out to me in the analysis were restaurant sales growth year to date through February 23rd, up 16.5%, and retail sales growth year to date through February 23rd, up 5.6%. So Andy, can you provide us some insight around, retail and restaurant, both of those categories, and what are you seeing? And can you share your thoughts if your thoughts have changed since March consumer spending numbers came out?
Sure. So it is really a stark contrast, keeping in mind that inflation, let's call it over the last 3 months, has been, gone maybe from, 6.5 down to 5. And you look at the spend in relation to inflation, starting at a high level, restaurants are just clearly way outpacing anything you see in inflation. But retail at a macro level is kind of like treading water right around inflation. And let's break that down a little bit more. When we look at restaurants, it's across a broad spectrum of types of restaurant and food service. We're seeing this. I mean, be it Starbucks, be it Chick-fil-A, Chuck E. Cheese, to a Fresh and Co., to more niche, chains like a Maggie Moo. You're just seeing that growth way outpacing inflation, which again is going back to that theme of, hey, you've got discretionary spend. People are clearly wanting to get out and do things that, more of the things that they did pre-pandemic. It's been going on for a while, but that's taking more and more of someone's discretionary spend by choice and their value propositions, right? They're choosing to put their money there. Then you go to retail, and it's a little more fragmented. You do see, more, let's say winners and losers. So, if you take a look, like department stores, you've got overall 6% growth year over year. But the interesting thing is we're seeing transaction growth at 10%, which is an implication that they're trading to lower cost goods within department stores. You look at areas like warehouse, the Costco's, they're again outpacing. They're doing well, the wholesale, they're at roughly 9% growth year over year, outpacing inflation. You're diving into some of the retailers more specifically, your value based like a TJ Maxx, they're doing well. You contrast that with the Macy's, they're losing share to a Nordstrom or a Kohl's or a Bergdorf. So, this landscape is speaking to, more consumer thought in where they're spending and absolutely more higher implication in the retail sectors to make good decisions, be it inventory pricing, across the board, and even their marketing and how they're connecting.
Yeah, it's gotten fairly complicated, and these retailers really have to dig into data and try to figure out where the consumer is going. We know that the consumer spending is pursuing low end, and off price for fashion, for example, or super high in luxury. And again, the middle tier is being squeezed out by both ends of the spectrum. And by the way, you know this, I'm sure, Macy's has a new CEO coming on board in February of 2024, and that is Tony Spring, who in my opinion has done a great job as CEO of Bloomingdale's over the last 10 years that he's been there. And I believe he's a visionary strategist, and don't be surprised if we witness some bold and innovative moves to take Macy's to another level. I think we're going to see that from him.
Yeah, I think you're going to see Macy's gaining back some of that share because of those bold moves that he'll make. But, department stores are also impacted just because they're oversized. I mean, consumers just don't want to shop in these big oversized stores. And I know Nordstrom's, Bloomie's, Macy's, they're all kind of addressing this with their kind of small store, localized store strategies. Discount stores don't have as much of an issue with size just because it's in a strip center or standalone. So you can get in, you can get out. It's very easy. Plus the variety of assortment. And right now, what's big for discount stores is extreme value. That's what they're offering. But Andy, one area of the report I found super interesting was around electronics. And if you could dive into those details, you have really a unique perspective on what's happening, but we're seeing a drop in electronic sales, but you're able to tell us what's happening there. So tell us what is going on with electronics.
Yeah, and I think to a degree it still follows that out-of-home versus in-home theme and where people are prioritizing. But we saw actually year-over-year dollar decrease in first quarter in electronics stores. So that's only part of the story. So dollar decrease was about 2.5%, 2.6%, but the transaction decrease was over 10%. So again, people were changing their product mix pretty significantly in Q1. And when we started to dive into it a little bit more deeply and also look at some of the earnings reports, what the overall conclusion is, it's like there's a shift. And you can take a Best Buy even, they even amplified this trend even more. They were down 19%, I think,
Wow.
In purchase dollars and 5% in transaction volume.
Yeah.
But I think Best Buy reported out sort of what had been the bread and butter: home computing, home theater, appliances, even phones were down, and people were shifting into gaming and tablets. But that was not making up, that mix was not making up for the loss in the other categories. And definitely some behavioral changes there.
Yeah. Well,
it
go
also
ahead.
goes to, just to, sum up some of what we've just been talking about with retail, with a lot of the rapid change in the way people are buying. In Q1, we saw many companies actually sort of pause on a lot of their marketing and advertising spend, but yet consumers were still spending. So with uncertainty, there's always opportunity. And Robin, to your point earlier, I think that our point of view is that very smart marketing tactics in times of change are opportunities to pick up share, whether that's Macy's in the future with a new CEO or not. These inflection points do lead to opportunity for those who seize it.
Yeah. One person's piece of gold is another person's trash. Anyway. But I don't want to get off into another topic here, but I've been watching Best Buy and what the new CEO there is doing, and I wrote an article on this a few months ago. She is actually uh, letting a lot of the store associates go, and she has gone from having experts in each field of electronics or each category of electronics, experts who could educate the consumer who came into the store about what they should know about that particular device and so forth and so on. And she's going with the strategy that says we want all of our associates to be generalists so they can talk about any particular device or any brand. And I criticize that in the article because I think that is one of the reasons that her predecessor really put in place to have these specialists. And I believe that that is a big reason why Best Buy came back from a big slump. I mean, they were getting killed by Walmart and Amazon. But now she seems to be going back to the other things. So we will see. But Andy, all these points you're making are very, very good. And this downward consumer trend combined with inflation at near 40-year highs begs the question, how long can consumer spending growth continue? So, Andy, what are the headwinds out there, and what do you see looking ahead?
Okay.
A lot of the journalism out there is, it's been doom and gloom, but there are some positive numbers, and that indicate that strong consumer spending may continue at least in Q2. Low unemployment, consumer savings, and the travel increases always impact favorably on the overall retail spend.
That's right.
So what do you see? What are the headwinds and tailwinds?
Okay, well, Robin, to your point, we've got both. We do have tailwinds and headwinds. So starting with some tailwinds, unemployment is at a historic low. People are working, and they're, even if they're not switching jobs as often as they were a year ago, employment is holding up very well. We also, I believe that consumers still have leftover savings from the pandemic. I think the Wall Street Journal had said, maybe 2.7 trillion was saved during the pandemic. There's still a bunch of that in people's savings accounts. So, there is a cushion. And to your point, behavior to date has shown that, right? People are still spending, and it has surprised many pundits that discretionary spend has held up. Now, there are a number of tailwinds. So, there are a number of, with all those tailwinds, there are a number of headwinds. As you pointed out, the Fed wants inflation more like 2%, even if this month it's down to 5%, it's still way above the target rate. But for us, more concerning perhaps than even that is we're seeing credit card debt has been growing, much faster than perhaps from 2009. We've seen personal savings rates, from your, the weekly paychecks declining since last year. We also know that, the pause on student loan payments may stop this summer. And overall, given whether you call it a banking crisis or just concerns, there is a large potential for credit to tighten significantly. All of those things could meaningfully impact discretionary spend. So where we're sitting right now, we think discretionary spend will continue to grow through at least Q2, but we'll be tracking that blend of headwinds to see how it plays out over the next few months.
Yeah, it makes sense why credit cards the debt is so much higher, because consumers are spending so much more on what you talked about earlier, shelter, food, and energies. So they're, looking for other ways. But, Andy, Rob and I just did a podcast called Retail's Hinge Point in Time Reveals the New Normal,
Yep.
where we discussed how forces for change are really redefining the new rules of retail in real time. So factors like Gen Z, a hybrid workforce, loyalty programs, emerging technologies, all of these things are resetting
Yep.
what we think is the playing field for retail. So any thoughts on these macroeconomic forces and how this may play out for retail, travel, restaurants? And do you think we're heading into a new normal of spending?
Uh, yes. Well, I don't know if there is a normal. So, so putting the term normal aside, and I did listen to the podcast. It was terrific. So, yes, there are clearly changes in, as you guys pointed out, in Gen Z, overall consumer value priorities. And those value priorities impact how they spend, but also importantly, who they spend with and where. Let alone, how we work. So, putting the how we work aside, that emerging change in values that I think is, you point to Gen Z, but I do think it, kind of has a halo effect beyond Gen Z over time. Again, impacts how people spend, but also creates opportunities. And, for us, one of the interesting things is we do digital audiences to help, merchants and retailers do better targeted advertising. And, we started getting into more of social-based audiences. Hey, people who have an affinity for, environmental trends, whatever it may be. And we've also started to sync up with some agencies because we see a growing trend of literally, when you're served a digital ad online, some companies are starting to give the consumer an opportunity to literally click and donate within that ad. So you've got now brands starting to try and create sort of social identities, tie it into their advertising and connect with consumers. And I do think we're very much at the tip of the iceberg. And I don't know if anyone knows really the best way to do it, but I do think, to your, podcast on inflection points, I do think this is a growing trend, and it will, I think, impact which companies gain or lose, discretionary spend, even in tough times.
Yeah, that's very well put, Andy. And I do remember, Shelley, you put together a great profile of the Gen Z culture, which I think, one of the major points you were making from a macro point of view is that they more and more are being very deliberative about where they shop, and they want to know that the brand they're shopping in is all in with the values of their culture. And I think over time, this is going to cause huge strategic and structural change in the industry, and it already has started, but I think we'll see it. Anyway, Andy, once again, in my opinion, you have an incredible capability of turning data into actionable knowledge. And I really believe that, spending time with you. Anyway, and of course, this industry desperately needs what you have during the seismic changes that consumers are demanding, forcing macro strategic and structural shifts, as I mentioned. So this historical era needs what you do.
Right.
And and thanks so much again, Andy, for sharing your insights with us.
Thanks for having me. And, I think the important part is being, from our perspective, is helping our customers drive better outcomes. To, the Gen Z conversation. Look, card spend tends to, be pretty holistic. whether it's someone, whether it's helping to create a 360 profile so they can see where they should connect on social causes with their customers, or more basic competitive analysis. Our job is to help our customers succeed. So in uncertain times, smart use of data can help. I appreciate you having me on the podcast. And, if anyone is interested in seeing the entire report, there's a lot of rich information there. They can go to commercesignals.com and download it.
Great. Thanks, Andy. Always, you were great. And I love the spend analytics suite that you offer. So
Thank you.
really great. So for our listeners, you can find more of our podcasts on Apple, Spotify, Buzzsprout, and of course, therobinreport.com. Look for us on YouTube, where we broadcast our podcast as well. And please follow us on social media. Link in with us for the latest thoughts about the industry.
And as I do every week, I encourage all of you listening and viewing that if you have a topic you would like Shelley and I to cover, please send me an email. It's robin@therobinreport.com. And I want to thank all of you again for tuning in. Take care.